Hello and welcome to Irrelevant Side Quest. I'm your bro D-Start, and I have 6 reasons why Dark Souls is survival horror. Now, I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't take credit for coming up with the idea at all. I felt like taking a closer look at what makes Dark Souls feel like a survival horror RPG. Now, just to be sure, there could be some spoilers in this video for anyone that hasn't completed the game, so just putting this out there if you care about that kind of stuff. Just a spoiler warning. I imagine that if you're watching this video, you don't care about spoilers or have already completed the game several times. Back to the video. Limited healing is a feature that usually follows any survival horror when there is combat involved, and since this is an action RPG, first and foremost, combat wasn't something that was optional, but the way healing was approached makes this stand out from the crowd. A good way to cut out all the tension in your horror game is to have the player get an item or ability that lets them heal essentially whenever and however many times they want. Dark Souls doesn't have this. You are given an Estus flask at the start of the game, and it is your main source of healing while in combat. There are other means of healing your character, but none of them are unlimited. Starting off, the player gets 5 uses of the Estus flask before it's empty. Then the player has to rest at a bonfire to refill, essentially resetting the world and respawning all the enemies at the same time. Also, you can upgrade the effectiveness of your Estus by giving Firekeeper's souls to, well, a Firekeeper, and you can kindle your bonfire so you get more Estus uses after resting. The game isn't impossible after all. You can find a rare healing item called Divine Blessing that works similar to an elixir in Final Fantasy, fully healing and removing certain status ailments. There are only a set number of these in each playthrough. I personally suffered from a bit of too good to use syndrome and ended up never equipping any when I really needed it, but that's just me. There are also faith miracles the players can learn to heal themselves that also have limited uses and require the player to invest souls to gain this ability if the right class isn't chosen at the start of the game. They do, however, have a lengthy casting time. The player needs to complete the incantation for the heal to take effect, so it is not suitable in most combat situations, and requires the player to equip a talisman to cast the miracles, costing an equipment slot that could be put to better use. There are also equipment that have healing abilities, but they are so weak that it is almost to the point of being useless as a healing item. Thought I'd just mention that, but it was not part of the initial thing. Moving on! A staple of survival horror is to not make the player feel empowered. It's quite the opposite. Each monster the player faces is meant to be an obstacle in the way, requiring the player to overcome and conquer before they can continue on their journey. Now, this doesn't mean the game doesn't have enemies that aren't subjectively easy to defeat. It's just that put in certain situations, even the weakest of monsters can be a fatal threat if caution isn't used by the player. Recklessness and standard RPG combat is only rewarded with death. Dark Souls requires the player to pay attention to their surroundings, the placement of enemies, and the ever-present possibility of the unknown, which can easily lead to the sneaky ambush awaiting ahead, or when you're playing online, being invaded by another player. Mechanically, stamina is what governs what happens in combat. The player uses stamina to do everything, needing them to manage how much stamina they're using after each action, because being caught with not enough stamina to finish a combo, dodge roll, or block an attack can lead to an easily avoidable death. Boss fights are the true test of this skill. Having to read their fight patterns while surviving whatever chaos they are throwing at you, always imposing and intimidating, the orchestral music swelling in the background almost goading you into being heroic and reckless. A brick wall to your progress, doomed to throw yourself at it over and over again until you figure out how to defeat them. There's no power fantasy to be found here, it is all about surviving. Although no matter how far you are in the game, the amount of damage that can be sustained from the enemy is relatively high compared to other RPGs. The player is almost always one combo away from death. Some attacks from bosses can one-hit kill, leading to the most frustration in the game. But it all isn't without some fairness. Most enemies follow similar rules of stamina, so you can predict when there will be an opening to attack, and any strong attacks that can one-hit kill the player have an obvious tell, so you can see it coming with enough time for you to also evade the attack. You just have to be observant enough to see it. The environment itself is hostile to the player, winding around in a maze with locked doors blocking the player's progress. No real direction is given at the start of the game, and there's no map or HUD indication on where you should be heading to. It's up to the player to investigate and use intuition to determine where they should go. As the game goes on, it becomes second nature to explore, even though a clear objective isn't known at the time, once or twice wandering into an area that they shouldn't. Then partway through the game, the hostility increases and actual traps are set for the player to fall prey to. Swinging axes on small walkways, pressure pads, spikes, and even a classic like the rolling boulder. As an example, as the player steps into Sen's fortress, the very first thing they are greeted with as they're walking through the now open gate is a pressure pad that activates a deadly arrow trap. Welcome to the House of Traps. As with everything else in this game, if you were observant, you would be able to see the obviously raised pressure pad as you approach the entrance, and because of the distance you have enough time to raise your shield and block the arrows. Not like the game is unfair, until it is. The first mimic in the game, without any knowledge that there are mimics in this game until this point, is a guaranteed insta-kill for the unsuspecting. Mechanically, the way the player traverses through the world of Dark Souls isn't pleasant. It is one of endless resistance, with every monster respawning again infinitely after every rest at a bonfire. It never ends. Entire sections of the game are hidden away by secret paths. Others are locked away, requiring the player to have a specific item or key to continue, often revealing a shortcut to a previous section of the game, looping around in on itself. Once all shortcuts and paths explored, it is revealed that the whole area is connected together in one big location, with some exceptions. This is how a player explores a survival horror game, although usually we get a map. The one thing that can be argued to be lacking in this survival horror RPG is the horror. Now, I'm only drawing similarities. The developers didn't intentionally try to make this a horror game, although I do feel like this is a precursor to a new wave of horror RPGs, but that's just me. It can't be ignored that there are some themes, designs, and locations in this game that are close to horror. In fact, the game rarely hits an uplifting note. Even in the scene of finally reaching the city of Analondo, has the character being carried by winged demon bat monsters. The city is supposed to be the shining city of sunlight, but it has the shadow to it that has the player have doubts about what is actually going on. The game explores themes of death, loneliness, and insignificance. The players literally at one point left in the dark to figure their way through a tomb of giants, only able to see immediately in front of themselves, until walking into a giant skeleton you have to fight, only if we had a lantern of some kind to light the way. Another thing that adds to the horror aspect of this game, but not in a traditional sense, is the difficulty of Dark Souls. This game has earned itself a reputation for being brutally difficult, going so far to name its complete release, including the DLC, Dark Souls Prepared to Die Edition. It's well known that it is a punishingly difficult game with no settings to make it any easier, and the challenge has proved to be too much for some people, saying that they have avoided the game or given up on it very quickly. It's certainly not a horror game, but it's no epic tale of an adventurer out to find glory and save the world from the big bad guy with his party of friends. I think something like Bloodborne is a lot closer to what I'm talking about, but it can't be denied that Dark Souls has a minimal amount of horror in it. Besides, horror is subjective. The Last of Us is considered a horror game because there are zombie-like monsters in it. Actually, Dark Souls has hollows. Does that count? I think that counts. That certainly counts. There are no heroes in Dark Souls. There are ancient dragons that don't exist anymore, the gods that have abandoned everyone, and the hollowed that remain behind, slowly becoming lesser until they are mere husks of themselves. You are fortunately an undead that still has their wits about them, but it won't last forever. You are told that a chosen undead will one day ring both bells of awakening and embark on a pilgrimage to the city of Analondo. And for reasons the player chooses, the hollowing undead decides to take on this quest. It isn't a dramatic call to arms. You're not a hero coming from a faraway land to save the people of Lordaeron. You aren't even given the quest at the start of the game. It's just something mentioned by a stranger that helped you out of your cell in the undead asylum. To have characters attempt to survive through a horrific ordeal has always been what I thought a main theme of survival horror, and the best of this genre tends to have characters that are not of the heroic nature, being something of a common man or woman, just barely able to survive through and certainly doesn't come out unscathed. You can certainly do amazing things at the end of the game, a result of overcoming the dangers you faced in Lordaeron, but it still doesn't draw away from that you are one of the many chosen undead. Many have tried, many have failed along the way. Even the ending of the game, depending on the way you look at it, is a defeat. There are no heroes in Dark Souls. Something that has come to be a fan favorite is the way narrative is told in Dark Souls. It's not straightforward or even beaten over the player's head in unskippable cutscenes. It is done through item descriptions, flavor text beneath the names of items, briefly giving a small detail about the world out of context. It's something of a staple to have narrative text in a survival horror game, usually left around in notes, torn pieces of paper, or written in blood on the walls. Dark Souls takes this but makes it the main way a player can learn about what are the motives of other characters, who the other characters are, what has happened to this place, and most importantly, where to go if you're not too sure. There are cutscenes in the game. The beginning cinematic gives a lot of context to what is going on, and even a cheeky sneak peek at the bosses you may face while playing the game. Other cutscenes are boss introductions, or the very rare cutscene of meeting someone important. From all of this, you can get an idea of what is going on, but it is only once you start down the rabbit hole of reading item descriptions you begin to doubt everything, leading to looking at certain characters differently and affecting how you play the game. It's such a feat to gather enough context out of these descriptions that there are channels all over YouTube dedicated to going through them all and making sense of what the developers have left behind, piecing it all together, interpreting it into a narrative for the game. Those are my 6 reasons why Dark Souls can be considered a survival horror RPG. I've enjoyed writing about Dark Souls. It is one of my favorite RPGs. I think I might do more content on it in the future. Let me know what you think. Is Dark Souls survival horror? And are there any better examples of horror RPGs? Thanks for watching. I might be starting a side series to go alongside the survival horror stuff I do to take an even closer look at Dark Souls and its sequels and any other horror RPGs maybe. Expect to see more content to be uploaded on this channel. So take a break, rest at the bonfire that is Irrelevant Side Quest. I'm your Firekeeper D-Start. Again, thanks for watching. Laters.